In the studio is the former chairman of the Mississippi GOP and attorney, the one and only Lucien Smith. Good morning, Lucien. How are you, sir?
Doing great, Paul. It's good to be with you.
Here's a quick shot. Mississippi Shipyard has a new contract, $302 million contract for amphibious and dock landing ships, with an option that could more than double that total. The Pentagon list of contracts signed a few days ago says the Huntington Ingalls Shipyard in Pascagoula is expected to complete the work by May 2028. Shipyard was one of two bidders to build amphibious transport dock ships, amphibious assault ships, dock landing ships, and amphibious command ships. Options could bring the contract's total value to more than $724 million, said the brief statement.
That's fantastic.
It is good news, but and again, they need people so badly there. You know, they hold these workshops and employment seminars and things such as that. But if you're looking for, you're anywhere in the state, I always say that if you're from an impoverished area, there are no jobs around there. You're graduating, you want to stay in the state, you want a good job, you want to move to the coast, then here's a perfect opportunity.
Yeah, and my understanding is a beginning welder at Ingalls can make somewhere north of $60,000 after a certificate program.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great opportunity for people.
And it's not only welders. There's a multitude. If you go to the website, you'll see a multitude from office work, clinical work, it's from behind a desk to in the field itself.
Yeah, and that's an area that Roger Wicker really deserves a lot of credit for, because he has been aggressive in making sure that the Congress authorizes enough sea power, enough ships to protect the homeland. And so there's both a national security aspect, but obviously there's a huge economic impact for Mississippi.
I did see something yesterday in the news about, I think we were building 169, 170 new jets, the first-class jets, so it's good to know that everything's not cutting back. Some of these contracts have been in the works for a while.
Well, and that's one thing we're going to have to watch, especially with the Biden administration.
Yeah.
One thing President Trump was very good at was not accepting America's decline, and I think there was an attitude with Barack Obama's administration, and certainly with Joe Biden and the people around him, that it's just kind of inevitable that we're going to go the way of Europe and be kind of a minor player in the world, and it's time to give the Chinese control of the world. And one of the ways we prevent that is by making sure we've got the strongest, most powerful military in the world.
Well, one of the things we do know is that the world looks a lot differently going forward for the next 4 years for China.
That's right.
Under a Biden administration than it would have been under 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously you've got these stories about Hunter and all that, but there's just, my view is we're the greatest country in the history of the world, and America being the leader of the world is vital for American security, for American economic growth, but it's also important for the world. I mean, we've just got a different set of values than the communist Chinese, and we can't let them win.
I would like to see what the punitive damages are and the results of that if they were put together on a, as far as run some numbers on that, what they owe us. I think it would cancel out our debt.
No doubt about it.
And I think they were worried about that, too. Speaking of Hunter, it's a story that's not going to go away, even though most of the main media tries to bury that every single time.
They filed the Freedom of Information on Hunter Biden's travel record.
Bill O'Reilly.
And they got it. Listen to this. So while his father was vice president, Hunter Biden took 23 flights in or out of Joint Base Andrews. That's where Air Force One and Air Force Two are located. 23. He visited China 5 times in that period. Hunter got around. I mean, Hunter was all over the place, paid for by the U.S. government, by you and me.
And there are other pictures of where they dined and played golf together with the vice president at that particular time, and also as not vice president but a private citizen. So don't tell me he didn't know anything about it.
Well, I've always thought the best way to figure out what the Democrats are doing in terms of the sort of sleazy personal activities is what are they accusing the Republicans of doing. You heard 4 years of them saying, look at all of Donald Trump's family. They're making money off of him being president.
Yeah.
I think they lost money off him being president. I think the Bidens have made an awful lot of money out of Joe Biden being in public life.
You know this guy? I asked Sean Tyndall this a few moments ago. You know this guy named Brad White?
I was thrilled to see that announcement yesterday. Brad's a dear friend. He's a good person, and I think the commissioners they made a great decision in bringing Brad over.
Now, the thing that a lot of people may not know, Brad has some expertise in that department. He's not a novice in that department.
He started his career there. I remember. I remember when my first job in politics was working on Haley Barbour's campaign almost 20 years ago, and I remember. I don't remember which activist it was, but somebody saying, there's a young guy who works for Dick Hall who you should meet named Brad White, and we've been friends since then. And so I think there were a lot of us when Melinda submitted her retirement who sort of assumed that Brad would be a natural fit there. And I think that's just a great hire. I'm proud of him, and I'm proud of the three commissioners for making a good decision.
A lot of other things to talk about. I do want to get into the initiative thing as far as you as being a lawyer, and you look at in hindsight now, and I haven't had a chance to have you on here. You may have talked about it elsewhere, but your thoughts on that?
I think, first of all, I think we need to have a special session. I think we need to have a special session soon.
On the initiative or the medical marijuana?
If I were the governor's chief of staff, my advice to him would be, let's call a special session exclusively on getting medical marijuana done. And I'll say, I voted no on the initiative. I don't think the initiative was a good idea, but I don't think it's good to have 74% of the people show up to vote for something thinking that their vote matters and then subsequently find out it really didn't matter because it was unconstitutional. So if I were there, I would have already suggested we call a special session, get the medical marijuana legislation through, and then let the legislature come back next year and work out the constitutional initiative, because I think that's going to be a longer, more complex issue. This
is ground game stuff here, but backroom stuff. Are they ready for that? Can they do that right now? Do they have enough time to put this thing together?
I think they do. I mean, I think you could. You don't have to call the special session to start working on it. What we did in Governor Bryant's administration, we would have gotten with legislative, and I don't know that this isn't happening. So this is certainly not meant to sound like a criticism. We would have gotten the legislative leadership together. We would have gotten our lawyers and their lawyers together, and we would have worked out something that we believed the governor could sign, that both of the chambers could pass. And then Governor Bryant would have called a special session, and it would have been a 1, maybe 2 day special session where we just knock it out.
Let me ask you, because as the former chairman of the GOP in the state of Mississippi, you would know this. You're ear to the ground for quite a few years there. And I often say this, and I hope I'm not wrong, but I don't think there was this big groundswell for medical marijuana or marijuana in the state of Mississippi in the last 5 or 10 years. And the legislators didn't hear this from town hall meetings, from the church group, and anybody else. Now, we may have been right about that in the guest yesterday, saying that the younger people weren't communicating in those venues. And they may be right, but the people they were talking to is certainly in the demos of voters.
Yeah, and I think, my sense, just from people I've talked to, was there was enough support for medical marijuana among older voters, which you'd expect with 74% voting yes. So I just don't think there was a groundswell that they missed. I think it was when the question was presented with a lot of messaging behind it, people voted yes.
What do you think is going to have to, when we come back, what do you think is going to have to be the mainstays, the building blocks of this? We know that taxes need to be going to, like the Constitution, not directly to the drug dealers, legal drug dealers,
right,
but to the general fund or some allocations, and we'll talk about those. What are the building blocks that you think will get this thing through the legislative process, and maybe even in a special session? Back with more with the one and only Lucien Smith right after this.
People are driving for miles to experience the car buying difference at Toyota of Brookhaven. Welcome to Toyota of Brookhaven, where we want you to enjoy the car buying experience. We love doing business in Brookhaven, where our customers become our friends. We're proud that we've won awards for our customer service and satisfaction. So visit us on site, Exit 40 in Brookhaven, or online at ToyotaofBrookhaven.com, because it's just different here. Great service, great savings. At Toyota of Brookhaven, we deliver.
Whether you're brand new to the DIY craze or a seasoned veteran, the Handyman Show has something for you. Buddy Slowick shares tips and tricks on everything from odd jobs to complete build-outs, from small home repairs to serious construction. So no matter if you're at the master carpenter level or not quite sure how to use a level, the Handyman Show answers your questions with a healthy dose of humor and some great music too. Saturdays, 10 to noon on Super Talk Mississippi and on Super Talk TV.
Aging is different for everybody, and AARP is here to help people choose how they live as they age, with trusted information and a wide range of tools and resources, like tips on how to stay healthy and care for loved ones, ways to help and protect yourself and your family from fraud, thriving in a multi-generational workforce. AARP was founded to empower older Americans and to help them live their best lives. It's what we've always done, and it drives everything that we do today.
106.3 Casino Radio is here. Tune to 106.3 to discover all of our must-see attractions and everything that's happening at our 12 incredible casino resorts. Where to eat, where to stay, what to do, and where to play. 106.3 Casino Radio has you covered with everything you need to know to help make your visit here to the coast one you'll never forget. Turn on 106.3 Casino Radio or listen now on our website, CasinoRadio1063.com.
Supertalk.fm has a new look and is more informative than ever with expanded Mississippi news coverage, the latest Mississippi weather, Mississippi sports, and of course, the talk that's important to you. Every show, every podcast, and every late-breaking story. Constantly updating the news the second new developments happen. All in one place. The new Supertalk.fm.
It is total mayhem at Barnes Crossing Hyundai during our spring upgrade sales event. Save $6,000 on a 2020 Hyundai Santa Fe with payments of $329 per month. Or save over $4,500 on a 2021 Hyundai Tucson and pay only $279 per month. And get Hyundai's Assurance, America's best warranty. Plus, we'll always pay top dollar for your trade-in, even if you don't buy from us. Where nobody walks away because everybody saves at Barnes Crossing Hyundai in Tupelo.
To the most talked about audio clips, headlines, and analysis. It's still a mystery how he fits them all into one incredible show. Paul Gallo. The Gallo Radio Show is on Super Talk Mississippi.
It was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day.
Thank you.
It must have been a live presentation.
I was out chopping cotton and my brother was baling hay.
Check the calendar, ladies and gents. It is the 3rd of June.
And at dinner time we stopped and we walked back to the house to
Okay, we can go back to the...
Thank you very much. But the request of the music request has been done, fulfilled. She's still living in Memphis, Tennessee, as far as we know.
Last I heard, she was in Vegas. I don't know.
I think she left Vegas, went back to Memphis or something.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
You know what I'm going to do while you talk to Lucien?
Access that.
Thank you.
Google it up. Lucien Smith, former chairman for the state GOP. All right, on the initiative process, what do you think if we do this or the medical marijuana special session? If the governor did call this, do we have they compiled enough of what needs to be put together? You know, I had mentioned and went over the Alabama. They passed theirs and looked at it. And the Alabama language that they had sounded pretty darn good. There may be some variations they need to do, but for the most part, would be a good template for what we need to do.
Yeah, and you also, I think you would start with the initiative itself. I mean, I think what the legislature should pass should hew as closely as possible to what the voters actually voted on. And now, I think there's some areas where the legislature legislators had some concerns, where I had some concerns about zoning, who regulates it, et cetera. And so I think you can make some small tweaks. Mm-hmm. But I think the bulk of it should essentially be what the legislature, what the people voted on last year.
I don't think the industry itself would care too much as far as where the money goes.
That's right.
If it goes to the general fund, I don't know if they care that much about that. I think they're going to care about giving the communities an opt-out clause in here because that's going to cut their clientele.
That's probably right, but I think what you've seen with alcohol, because where there is or has been until recently a local option. The folks who lived in dry counties who wanted to have a glass of wine drove across a county line and brought it back. And so I think you would see the same thing happen here, even if, I don't think you could have possession criminalized in a county that didn't allow sales, but I think it would operate the way Rankin County used to before there were package stores over there.
And I also think reality is upon us that very soon, since Alabama's already done it, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Louisiana, all our bordering states are going to have it. And the closer we can come to the criminality or the legal aspect of that, the better it's going to be for people who live close to it, Meridian and Greenville or whatever it happens to be, Ocean Springs to the south or rather DeSoto County to the north.
I think that's right. And again, I'll say, look, I voted no. I wasn't for it, but I think 74% of Mississippi voters said they wanted
65A or just no, period?
I voted no. And then I voted for 65A.
Well, a lot of people did. So how can we possibly say that they were inclusive in that 76 or whatever percent?
Well, my point is just there's 74% voted for some form of medical marijuana. And so I think there's sort of an obligation to come up with a statute that reflects what people want.
What do you think is the vulnerability of something like voter ID? Because we hear that.
I don't think voter ID or eminent domain are at risk. I think there's at least an argument to be made that we kind of dropped the ball on the legal side in defending medical marijuana because I don't think we made the right argument. This argument that
from the AG's part?
From the AG's office. I think the AG's argument was essentially the 5 congressional districts in the Constitution really meant 4. Mm-hmm. Well, that if you've got conservative judges who are the sort of people who read a provision the way it's written instead of rewriting it the way liberals do, they're not going to go for that. I think the argument that they should have made comes out of the Barber pardon case from a decade ago. And what the argument should have been is that the signature requirement is a condition to have an election. But the election is the condition to amend the Constitution. And so the lawsuit that was filed should have been filed before the election. Yeah. But now it's too late because what changes the Constitution is the election. I think that's an argument that, had it been made, was much more likely to get the Supreme Court support.
Should the legislature take this opportunity to improve the initiative process itself?
Absolutely.
How would you do that?
If it were me, I think the people need to have the ability to amend the Constitution. But I think we also, because people have used this or attempted to use this as a way of advancing what are really statutes, I would have a separate initiative process that would have a similar very high threshold, because we don't want to turn into California where we're having an election twice a year to try to pass laws, but have another provision where you were able to put something like medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, whatever sort of bill you're interested in, wine and grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera. And if it's passed, it goes in the code book, not the Constitution. Because what always happens, and this was my concern about 65, what always happens, you pass something and then you see how it operates, and a year or two later you go, we didn't realize this was going to work out that way.
But who's going to settle for that? Because if it's in the code book, they could come back and change it as far as the legislative process.
They could, and I've heard some people argue that you ought to have some sort of supermajority to be able to change it. Yeah. But I think putting it in the code book, I think it's going to be very difficult for a legislator. If something goes in the code book with an overwhelming public vote, I think if they come back and undo that, I think people will get beat over it. And so I think that's only going to happen where you've got these sort of technical changes that need to be made, but the overarching piece of legislation is going to stay the same.
My understanding is that there's only 24 states that have an initiative process.
Yeah, and we only put that in, as I appreciate it, in the early 90s.
It's not like everybody has it. 24 states out of 50 have the initiative process. Some of them have it where, and again, I mentioned this before, which seems to be a little bit more workable, where they say, as California did, we want recreational marijuana. Now, the legislature has got to pass it. They can write the rules and regulations, but here's what we want. And then they test it as a mandate to the legislature.
Yeah, look, I'd be open to that also. What I think we have to get away from, what concerns me, is anytime you constitutionalize policy, even if you like the policy that ultimately proves to be a bad thing, and that's one of the reasons that I was against 65.
Well, it also, I think that would have manifested itself too, Lucian, if we did the Hospital Association's desire for Medicaid expansion.
That's another good example.
To me, that was even, if it's possible, scarier than the medical marijuana.
Well, and that's, you think about Medicaid.
Financially speaking.
Well, there's a huge risk financially. I worked with Governor Bryant to block Medicaid expansion back in 2013, in large part because we can't afford it. But that's the sort of thing, the federal government, that's such a highly regulated, controlled by federal law. If you put something like that in the Constitution, even if you think it's a good idea, which I don't, but if you put that in the Constitution, well, if the federal law changes, if the guidance from the federal regulators change, we then have to have a new constitutional amendment to try to get that to work again. So that's why I think we need to have an initiative process, if we have one, that allows things to go in the code.
Those unforeseen and unmovable things that could happen to you, not only on a federal basis, but on another tremendous depression or something, or a recession in the state of Mississippi. God forbid a depression, but a recession. If we lose a lot of money and we're agencies are dying. And the only way you could do it is cut back on them so you could retain some modicum of service. You couldn't if it's in the Constitution. That has to be funded.
That's right. But if it's in
people didn't understand that.
No, that's right. This is the reason we fought so hard against Initiative 42, which was the education funding initiative before. It was the same thing. If you put it in the Constitution, you take the people's power away to change
So
things.
you don't think the eminent domain is vulnerable?
I think if we make the right argument, I think there's a better chance that it'll survive. I also think there's a doctrine called latches, which is essentially a lawyer way of saying you waited too long to file something, and I think there'd be a better argument there. But I will say that they did codify the voter ID law. They did not codify eminent domain, and so eminent domain is at greater risk.
If you were doing a special session, would you put that on there, the eminent domain?
It'd be worth considering, so long as you had support on both sides to go ahead and codify it. But again, that's one where the people have voted on it, and so I think their expectations that was effective should be met.
People not paying a lot of attention to this, but next Tuesday, important elections as far as ground level municipalities, grassroots politics.
It's a big day. Yeah. We've worked, when I was chairman, we had over 150 local elected Democrats choose to join the Republican Party because it better represented their values. And the city governments are one of the few places where you still see some Democratic control, but I think we'll pick up a Republican seat in Tupelo. You've already seen the mayor of Oxford go independent. I think Toby Barker in Hattiesburg, who's a former Republican running as an independent, I think is in a good place. And then you've got a bunch of small towns like Ecru where you didn't even have a Democratic primary, unlike 4 years ago, because everybody's come over to the Republican Party. Yeah. So it's important people get out and vote, and I think it's going to be a good day for Republicans.
Polls open 7 o'clock next Tuesday morning.
That's right, June 8th. Get out and vote.
Lucian, thank you, sir. Appreciate it always.
Absolutely, Paul. Great to talk to you.